Hi, I wanted to spend a little bit of time reviewing where we've been in rigorous unit design and where we're heading in April. If you remember back August through December, we spent a lot of time unpacking standards to create target and organizing those targets into scales. January and February, we spent time planning for assessment and what assessment looks like within targets and scales. In March, the last time we met, we spent some time taking our targets in those scales and arranging them in lesson clusters. So April is where we're going to dip down into the instructional strategies. So I know that you have processed this chart in small groups and did some work with understanding what design questions are, what instructional strategies are, focus statements, and student evidence. So I want to make a couple of notes here that this is not a hard, fast rule, but looking at design question two and helping students interact with new knowledge, these instructional strategies are the mental processes that I want kids to um, go through in terms of their foundational targets and foundational knowledge. Okay, so a lot of my foundational targets are going to live with these instructional strategies. When I get into my learning goal target is when I'm going to start reaching up into design question three. And when I get into my cognitively complex task, which is the four on my scale, is where I'm going to go into design question four. However, that does not mean that in design question three, when I'm in my learning goal target, that I might not use instructional strategies from design question two to meet my learning goal targets and scaffold up to these instructional strategies that are higher level mental processes in design question three. So I wanted to show you an example of what this looks like for me. If you remember back in March, we took a scale that we had created and looked at the targets and clustered those targets into lesson clusters. So you see here, this was my research scale and the targets that I felt I would teach together in terms of kind of like a lesson sequence. So what I did was I chose one cluster of targets that I wanted to use to kind of play around with what would it look like using instructional strategies to plan and teach these targets. So over here, since this is a foundational learning cluster or lesson cluster targets, I'm primarily going to stay in design question two. So in design question two, we start off with identifying critical content, telling kids what's important, what's not important, what we're learning today, into previewing new content, which is activating schema, connecting new knowledge to existing knowledge, helping students process content and elaborate new content into kind of helping students record and represent knowledge, where I can kind of see what is it that you've learned. So with this research unit, kids are going to be doing different topics. So I need a way to be able to do a little bit of small group instruction, but also whole group instruction on how do I know that kids can elaborate on what they're learning through research, determine central ideas and supporting details, and narrow or broaden when appropriate. So I'm going to do a lot of small group conferring with kids individually, but I'm also going to use some Socratic seminar to help students show me and also elaborate on what they're learning through text, etc., determining central ideas. So I'm going to use a inquiry around community. What is and is not the responsibility of the school in building a positive community? So we're going to go through a series of Socratic seminars with kids using these questions. So my aim is that I've got kids engaged in these mental processes of processing content and elaborating new content. Now, I know that Socratic seminar, because of its very nature, could reach up into those mental processes that we see in design question three and those instructional strategies. But the intent of these learning targets, these foundational targets, I'm using Socratic seminar to make sure that kids can do these things and that kids can coach and support one another and use dialogue, deep reading, deep writing, and deep speaking to show understanding of these skills. So these are not new skills for kids. They had the same targets or similar targets in 11th grade, and they've been researching since 5th grade. So I want to make sure that kids are engaging in increasingly more complex topics, but also increasingly more complex texts. So I think in the past I've used instructional strategy, instructional technique, and instructional activity um, almost interchangeably. And we're making a distinction now that the instructional strategy really is the mental process that kids are going through. And the Socratic seminar, quick write, KWL, admission slip, etc., are the techniques that we're using to help engage kids into that mental process. So this is a first blush attempt at understanding instructional strategies. It's a 2-hour session. We're going to spend a lot more time on this next year and really digging deep into what we mean by instructional strategies and what these mean through our work. So today I would encourage you just to play around a little bit with the instructional strategies, look at some of your lesson clusters and the targets that are in those lesson clusters, and use different instructional strategies with different techniques. There's not a one-to-one correlation between strategies and techniques per se. It's what mental processes you're going after with your techniques to get at the learning targets, which is going to help you choose your instructional strategies. So I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to email me or call me, and I'll be happy to come out and answer any questions you have, etc. So thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.